I am a 72-year-old woman, but my body still craves experiences I can't ignore. And here is Mateo, my 19-year-old grandson, young, innocent, and just beginning to explore the world. With my experience, I was the only temptation he had never seen coming. What is happening? When a forbidden desire turns into a dangerous obsession that challenges everything we know as a family, the line between right and wrong begins to blur. And at 72, I thought I had seen it all. I became a widow 15 years ago when my husband, Ricardo, passed away suddenly. Since then, I have devoted myself to my family, my 2 children, my 4 grandchildren, and one of them, my most special grandchild. His name is Mateo, the boy who became the center of my deepest guilt. Mateo grew up to be a young man, just 19 years old. He is the son of my granddaughter, Sophia, who died in a car accident a few years ago. Mateo was left an orphan, and I welcomed him into my home. I watched him grow in our house and turn into an exceptionally intelligent and kind young man. He was tall for his age, with green eyes inherited from his father and a smile that lit up every place he entered. Mateo was everyone's pride, especially mine. He was my dearest grandchild, though I never admitted it out loud. Everything changed when he turned 19. He had completed his technical studies and was preparing to start his professional path. The transition from a boy to a man unfolded gradually before my eyes, but one day, something inside me was triggered, something that should never have been awakened. One spring afternoon, while we were in the garden, I saw him working in the small family plot. After finishing his work, I saw him for the first time not as the child I had raised, but as the person he had become. I realized that something forbidden was being born within me. "Aunt Olivia," he said to me with a smile, using that affectionate term that only deepened my guilt. "Do you need help with something?" His voice had grown deeper and more masculine. I tried to act normal, but my hands trembled as I organized the tools. "Thank you," I replied, avoiding direct eye contact with him. He stepped closer to help me with a branch, and his fingers brushed against mine. A jolt of electricity shot through me, and I dropped a small pot, suddenly. "Are you okay?" he asked, moving closer still. His genuine concern only added to my confusion. Every moment we shared, every innocent smile became torment. I hated myself for the thoughts that began to fill my mind. I reminded myself that he was my eldest grandson, someone I had raised, but something sick and twisted was growing within me. Mateo noticed the change in my attitude. I tried to avoid it. I locked myself in my room for any reason, but living under the same roof made it impossible to maintain distance. One night, while everyone was asleep, he found me crying on the terrace. "What's wrong, Aunt Olivia?" He sat next to me on the bench under the lemon tree that Sophia had planted years ago. The air was filled with the overwhelming scent of blossoms, blending with his natural fragrance. "I'm overwhelmed," I admitted. "You've done nothing wrong," he said softly. "The problem is with me." "Why would you say that?" His hand found mine in the darkness. This time I didn't pull away because I was feeling things I shouldn't feel. "I've confessed," I said, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. His hand remained on mine as he finally spoke. We sat there in silence, looking at each other under the dim streetlight, as if time had stopped. The air around us was filled with something unexplainable. Before I could react, he leaned toward me, leaving me paralyzed and unable to think clearly. What happened next was a gesture that shattered every barrier that should have existed between us, tentative yet intense, leaving me speechless. I should have stopped it at that moment. I should have walked away, but I didn't. Something inside me, something I thought I had forgotten, was reawakened. I responded instinctively, as though that spark had reignited a fire that had burned out years ago. The world around us faded away. It was just us, caught in a moment that seemed to transcend everything, not just what was happening, but also its meaning. It was a connection that defied all logic, all boundaries I once believed to be unbreakable. Our relationship turned into something dangerous and addictive. I distinctly remember that day while cleaning the library. I wore a light linen dress, perfect for the stifling summer heat. It was nothing special or flashy, just comfortable. I immersed myself in my task, focused on keeping everything organized without giving much thought to my outfit or how it might appear from certain angles at any given time. While searching for a book on the bottom shelf, I bent down to reach for it. I stood there for a few seconds, absorbed in my work, unaware of my surroundings. The house was quiet, and I had forgotten that Mateo usually returned from work around that time. When I looked up, I saw him standing there in the doorway. Something in his expression unsettled me. His gaze wasn't the same as usual, there was something different in it, something I couldn't decipher, but that made me feel strange. Mateo, who was always carefree, now seemed like a completely different person. His posture was more solid, his presence more commanding. There was a seriousness in his face that I hadn't noticed before. I felt vulnerable, as if time had altered the dynamics between us without my realizing it. I stood up and continued with my task, but I could feel his eyes still on me, as though an invisible barrier between us had been broken. I didn't know how to act. Was it just my imagination, or was there truly something different about him? Is something wrong? I asked, trying to remain calm while quickly standing up. I tried to hide the discomfort invading me, but when I looked at him, I realized he wasn't taking his eyes off me. His expression revealed something more than curiosity, and for a moment, my heart raced inexplicably. I didn't understand what he was trying to say. I had been feeling a growing sense of unease, something I cannot quite understand. Mateo approached me slowly, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with an unusual seriousness. Standing just a few steps away, his presence felt heavier than before. "You've been working so hard, Aunt. You should take a break," he said softly, his tone warmer than usual. The words carried an unfamiliar weight, and I found myself momentarily caught off guard. "Thank you, Mateo," I replied, trying to shake off the awkwardness. I stepped away to regain my composure, but his concern lingered. The kitchen was quiet except for the faint clinking of utensils. Mateo's steady demeanor had always been a source of comfort, but that evening, something felt different. His kind offer to help clear the table turned into a moment of reflection for me. Over the past few years, Mateo had grown into a thoughtful, responsible young man. Ever since moving in with me, he had always been the first to lend a hand, whether it was tending to the garden or helping with household tasks. He reminded me so much of his late mother, my daughter-in-law, who had been taken from us too soon. It was during those moments, shared tasks and conversations, that I began to see the person Mateo was becoming. His resilience, kindness, and determination to succeed despite everything inspired me daily. Yet, these feelings made me question myself, wondering whether I was holding on too tightly to memories of the past. Family gatherings, once filled with joy and laughter, had also become quieter. My eldest son, Javier, had noticed Mateo's growing presence in my daily life. "Mom, it's great that Mateo is here for you," Javier mentioned one afternoon. "He seems to be helping you a lot lately." I smiled and nodded, brushing off the remark. Mateo had become a pillar of support for me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Yet, I couldn't ignore the undercurrent of guilt I felt, guilt for leaning so heavily on him, guilt for wondering if I was burdening him with too much responsibility. That New Year's Eve, the entire family gathered around the table, as was our tradition. The air was filled with the scent of roasted vegetables and the faint sound of music playing in the background. Mateo helped me in the kitchen as always, effortlessly blending into the flow of activity. As we plated the last of the food, I glanced over at him and saw not just the young man he had grown into, but also the reminder of the family we had lost and the strength we still carried. His presence was a constant reminder that even in the face of loss, we could find hope and purpose. I sat in the dining room, the wine glasses filled, and the cheerful voices of my grandchildren echoing through the house. Yet, to me, it all felt like a cruel joke. New Year's Day, a time for reunion, had become a harsh reminder of what we had done, of the choices we had made and what we lost in a fleeting moment of weakness. Mateo had approached me like he often did when no one else was around. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering broke through the air. It stopped my heart. Elena, my 16-year-old granddaughter, stood at the doorway, her wide eyes frozen on the scene before her. A gasp escaped her lips, and chaos erupted in the kitchen. The pain reflected in her gaze mirrored my own. My daughter, Carolina, looked at me with a mix of anger and sorrow. Her eyes delivered a blow harder than any words she could have spoken. I tried to explain myself, to make them understand, but my words faltered and failed. Nothing I said could undo the damage. What we had done that night led to Matteo being sent away to live with distant uncles in another city. They wouldn't even let me say goodbye. Though I pleaded for forgiveness, my voice seemed to fall into an empty void. No one wanted to hear me. I was the one to blame. The months that followed were a living hell. Loneliness became my only companion. My children barely spoke to me. My grandchildren and even the neighbors looked at me with disgust. In the park, I saw families gathering, grandparents with their grandchildren, and once again, I felt like an outsider. I tried to drown out the accusing stares of those who once loved me. But my children no longer trusted me, and I didn't know how to rebuild what had been destroyed. Matteo sent me letters a few times, emails, calls from unknown numbers. Every word he wrote felt like a dagger in my chest, a reminder of what we had lost. I didn't respond. I knew I had no right to. Each time his words reached me, I would read them over and over, feeling as though I was sinking deeper into an abyss I could no longer escape. It was his final letter that brought clarity to everything. In it, he apologized for what had happened but also made me understand that what we had shared should never have occurred, for his sake, for mine, and for the sake of everyone else. His words were filled with an understanding that broke me, knowing that nothing I could say or do would ever repair the damage. I heard that Matteo was doing well. He had graduated, met a young woman his age, and was building a new life. Though I knew what we had shared was lost forever, I couldn't stop wondering if, in some hidden corner of his soul, he also thought about what we went through. Had he forgotten? Perhaps the shadow of what we did lingered with him, just as it did with me. I know that love has no limits, but I also know that love can blind us. It can drive us to cross boundaries we should never have approached. Some loves are born from a need to fill the emptiness, the aching loneliness within us. Others destroy us entirely. Mine destroyed me. I don't know if I will ever find peace again. I hope that one day, if fate allows, I can look my children in the eye with the same confidence I once had. I want to watch my grandchildren play without feeling like a stranger among them. But deep down, I know there are scars that will never heal, wounds that, no matter how much I try to mend, will always leave their mark. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, as I gaze out the window at the lemon tree, I wonder if Matteo has truly been able to forget. I wonder if my children will ever see me with the respect they once did. But most of all, I wonder if I will ever be able to forgive myself. Will I ever have the strength to face my demons, to free myself from the darkness that haunts me? I know what we did was a sin, one that cannot be erased, justified, or forgotten. But even as the guilt eats away at me, I cannot stop loving him. And perhaps that is my greatest sin of all.